Today, we are tackling one of those fundamental yet really frustrating questions in contract law. When you say yes to a deal, at what exact moment does that become legally unbreakable? I mean, we live in an age of instant everything, texts, emails, notifications right away. So why are we sometimes still governed by a rule from, what, the 19th century? Based on the physical postal service, the famous mailbox rule. So we're jumping into the deep end of contract formation here, specifically that critical moment of acceptance, especially when people aren't face to face. And we're using a really interesting case from Texas, Cantu v. Central Education Agency. It forces us to look at the line between saying accept this way and when the court just implies authorization. That implied part is key. Okay, so we have sources about this case. It involves a teacher, a school district, and a resignation withdrawal that was just hours too late. Our mission really is to figure out how courts decide what communication is reasonable and when that reasonableness means the contract is sealed the moment a letter hits the mail.
That's exactly the core problem, isn't it? Especially when you're not negotiating in the same room. The law here is really all about allocating risk during that time lag, that gap between sending and receiving. So to give you the full picture, we really need to break down the timing rules. We'll start briefly with the basics needed to undo a contract, which is what Ms. Cantu is trying to do. Then we'll lay out the mailbox rule versus the standard default rule. And finally, we'll use this Cantu case as our guide to see how courts figure out reasonableness when people are communicating from a distance.
Okay, good plan. Let's start with that first piece. Unwinding a deal. That's what Cantu was trying to do with her resignation. She wanted to rescind her employment contract. But for that to work, the resignation itself had to be seen as a valid agreement to terminate, right? So what are the core elements needed for that agreement? The one to rescind an existing contract.
Yeah, what's interesting here is that rescission isn't just hitting rewind. It actually works like a brand new contract. So to legally end the existing employment agreement, you need all the usual suspects. A valid offer, acceptance, and consideration for this new agreement to terminate the old obligations. Cantu's resignation letter, that was the offer to rescind the employment contract. If the school district accepted that offer, well, the original contract was done.
Okay, that makes sense. And that brings us right back to the timing issue. If I make an offer and you mail your acceptance back, there's that gap, that waiting period. What's the standard, the default rule that usually determines when an acceptance is legally effective?
Well, the general default rule is pretty cautious.
Yeah.
Acceptance is typically effective only upon receipt. When the offer actually gets it, it's cleaner, maybe safer in some ways.
Yeah.
The person making the offer knows exactly when they're bound the moment the acceptance lands in their hands, basically. But like you said, this puts all the risk, all the inconvenience of that delay squarely on the person accepting the deal, the offeree.
Right. But the law provides an alternative, doesn't it? There's the famous exception designed to speed things up and give the offeree some certainty. What exactly is the black letter rule for the mailbox rule? And what's the policy goal behind it? What does it try to achieve?
The mailbox rule is the big exception. Yeah, it completely flips the risk. It says acceptance is effective upon dispatch. That means the moment it's properly put in the mail, correctly addressed, stamped, all that. Assuming, of course, that mail is a reasonable way to accept. Historically, the idea was that this speeds up business. Commerce moves faster. By making acceptance effective when sent, it puts the risk of delay or the offer being revoked before acceptance arrives back onto the offer. After all, the offer started the whole thing and could have, specified exactly how acceptance needed to happen.
Okay, dispatch versus receipt. Got it. Now let's see how this plays out in the real world. Let's dive into Maria Dioso Cantu v. Central Education Agency. The whole fight seems to be about whether the school district could use the mail to accept, even though Cantu handed in her resignation in person. So let's use our FIRE Act structure. First, what are the legally dispositive facts?
Okay, the key facts are these. Cantu, the teacher, hand-delivered her resignation letter on a Saturday, August 18th, 1990. This was right before the school year started. Crucially, in that letter, she asked for her final paycheck to be mailed to an address 50 miles away in McAllen, Texas. The superintendent, he was the only one who could officially accept the resignation. He got the letter on Monday, August 20th. He wrote up an acceptance letter and then physically deposited it in the U.S. mail around 5:05 p.m. that same Monday. Then the very next morning, Tuesday, August 21st, at 8 a.m., Cantu showed up again in person and hand-delivered another letter, this time trying to withdraw her resignation.
Wow, tight timing. So the district says, deal done Monday evening, and Cantu says, nope, I withdrew Tuesday morning before you effectively accepted. What was the core legal issue the court had to decide?
The precise issue was whether the school district's acceptance, sent by mail, was effective the moment it was mailed on Monday under the mailbox rule. This is the crux. Could the mailbox rule apply even though Cantu hand-delivered her offer, the resignation, and never explicitly said you can accept by mail?
Yeah.
Her argument is basically, I handed it to you, you need to hand acceptance back or at least tell me directly.
Right, a classic communication mismatch. So faced with this, what rule did the court apply to decide if using the mail was okay here?
The court really leaned into the modern approach found in the Restatement Second of Contracts. It moved away from that old mirror image idea where acceptance had used the same method as the offer. The key rule they applied is this. Acceptance sent by any medium is effective on dispatch if using that medium was impliedly authorized and reasonable under the circumstances. So even if the offerer doesn't specify how to accept, the offeree can use any reasonable method, and if they do, the mailbox rule kicks in for that method.
Impliedly authorized and reasonable. Okay, that's the standard. It's not about matching the delivery method. It's about what made sense. So what was the court's analysis? How did they reason that mailing the acceptance was reasonable in Cantu's specific situation?
The court pointed to 3 specific things Cantu herself did, or circumstances she created, that made mail reasonable. First, urgency. She resigned literally right before the school year was supposed to start. The district had to act fast to find a replacement teacher. Second, the delay she introduced. By handing it in on a Saturday, she automatically built in a 2-day delay before the superintendent could even see it and act on Monday. And third, probably the most significant factor. She specifically asked for her final paycheck to be sent 50 miles away to McAllen. The court saw that as a really strong signal. It suggested she was operating from a distance, didn't plan to just pop back into the San Benito office anytime soon, and therefore mail was a perfectly sensible, even expected way for the district to communicate back.
Ah, the McAllen address, that seems to have been a big piece of it. Okay, and the conclusion. What was the final outcome for Cantu? Did she get her job back?
No, she didn't. The court concluded that because using the mail was reasonable under these circumstances created, in part by Cantu, the mailbox rule applied. That meant the acceptance was legally effective the moment the superintendent mailed it 5:15 p.m. Monday evening. So, by the time Cantu tried to withdraw her resignation offer at 8 a.m. Tuesday morning, it was too late. The agreement to rescind her employment contract was already formed and binding. Her withdrawal attempt had no legal effect.
Wow, so that whole outcome really hinged on that 50-mile address request. It basically opened the door for implied authorization. This ruling really does put the risk of that time lag the gap between sending and receiving on the offer if their actions suggest remote interaction is okay. Let's make this really concrete, visceral, to hammer home this idea of implied authorization. Imagine you own a super rare, valuable parrot. Let's say this parrot can perfectly recite sections of the Restatement of Contracts. Highly valuable. You decide to sell it. You send a formal written offer via private courier service to a well-known exotic bird collector who lives 300 miles away. You send this off on Monday. The collector receives your offer on Tuesday. Now, Wednesday morning, boom. A viral video hits the internet showing your specific type of parrot singing opera, and suddenly the market value goes through the roof. You instantly regret sending the offer. You frantically try calling the collector to revoke, to pull back your offer, but their phone line is busy. You just can't get through. Now, before you manage to reach them, the collector, happy with the original price, writes up an acceptance and drops it in a standard public mailbox on Wednesday afternoon. According to the Cantu rule we just discussed, when is that acceptance effective?
Okay, great hypo. Applying the Cantu logic here. You, the offerer, initiated this whole thing over significant distance, 300 miles. And crucially, you didn't specify how the collector had to accept. You didn't say acceptance only valid upon receipt by courier. Ponoli. So the collector using regular postal mail. That would almost certainly be considered reasonable under the circumstances. Mail is a standard way to communicate over that kind of distance. Therefore, the acceptance becomes legally effective the instant the collector dispatched it dropped it in the mailbox on Wednesday afternoon. The deal is locked in at the original lower price, even though you hadn't received the letter yet and were desperately trying to revoke. You, the offerer, bore the risk of that communication delay because your action sending an offer over distance without restrictions impliedly authorized a reasonable response method like mail.
Ouch. Bad news for the parrot owner, but a very clear illustration of the rule. Okay. This framework is incredibly helpful for navigating these tricky timing situations. So for the listener, maybe a law student facing an exam or anyone dealing with contracts, can you synthesize all these rules we've unpacked, rescission requirements, the default rule, implied authorization, the mailbox rule into a clear step-by-step diagnostic checklist, something to use for issue spotting when acceptance isn't immediate?
Absolutely. A checklist is perfect for this. Here's a four-step diagnostic flow you should run through anytime you have a distance acceptance question. Step 1. Check the basics. First, just confirm you have a valid offer to begin with. And importantly, if the agreement is about rescinding or modifying an existing contract, like in Cantu, make sure that the act of acceptance itself also satisfies the requirement of consideration for that new agreement, the agreement to rescind. Step 2. Did the offer control the method? Look closely at the offer. Did the offer explicitly demand or require a specific way to accept? Did they say acceptance must be by fax or acceptance only effective upon personal delivery? If yes, then only that method works according to its own terms, often upon receipt unless specified otherwise. The mailbox rule is generally off the table if a method is mandated like this. Step 3. Assess implied authorization and reasonableness. Okay, if the offer didn't lock down the acceptance method, then you ask the crucial question. Was the method the offeree chose, mail, maybe email today, reasonable under the circumstances? And this is where you weigh all those Cantu factors. The distance between the parties, how urgent the matter was, any prior dealings, and, critically, any expectations the offer's own actions created, like Cantu asking for her check 50 miles away. Step 4. Apply the correct timing rule, based on your Step 3 analysis. If the method used was reasonable, then acceptance is effective upon dispatch. That's the mailbox rule kicking in. But if the method used was unreasonable, under the circumstances maybe sending a snail mail acceptance for a stock option that expires in 2 hours, then the default rule applies, and acceptance is only effective upon actual receipt.
That's a fantastic checklist. Clear, logical steps. So the big takeaway from Cantu seems to be careful what your actions imply. If you set things up suggesting remote interaction is fine, the law might just agree and let the mailbox rule lock in the deal faster than you expected. This entire case, this whole deep dive, it all hinged on the physical act of dropping a letter in a mailbox back in 1990. But let's push this forward. What if the superintendent had simply emailed the acceptance to Cantu at 5:15 p.m. that Monday? Given the court's focus on any medium reasonable under the circumstances, which is straight from the restatement, well, how long until the mailbox rule effectively becomes the server rule, or maybe the send button rule? Is acceptance via email effective upon hitting send, logged by the server, even before it's open? That's the kind of high-speed legal question you really need to mull over as you deal with contracts in our instantaneous digital world.